you, Maha. I just want to give a big round of applause because that slideshow that showed all the work that has been done here. Congratulations to Maha, and thank you very much to Mustafa and to Dr. Qureshi and Maha and everyone for having us here today. So let's see if I can get this right. Okay. So how many people here are coming here today and they're just having like the best day, week, year of their life? Raise your hand. Be proud. If you're having that, just raise your hand, show. Okay. And how many of us have come here today and maybe you're figuring it out? Things are, you're a little lost. Things are, working themselves out. Show who you are. Okay, perfect. So I completely understand the second category, but I'm going to meet you in category one. So bear with me while I brag for 1 second. And again, I didn't expect my bio to be read, but this month has been a really good month for me. I gave a TED talk. Spotify put my face on a billboard in front of, in the middle of Manhattan. And I won this award for Best Emerging Podcast, for which I beat a Kardashian and an SNL star who I'm a big fan of, who was hosting the event. And they didn't come with prize money, so I couldn't afford the Getty image, but I'm very grateful to Astrida for taking this photo. And you guys will appreciate this. My mother's first question was, why is your skirt so short? And then her second question was, who is a Kardashian? And then finally, I think she was quite proud. But I think that I tell you these things not to show off, but because this is not where my life was 2 years ago. 2 years ago, this is where my life was. It was at the end of a pint of Haagen-Dazs, in a quite upset state because I had lost my on-air role as the executive producer on air on a hit podcast that I had helped conceive and create. I eventually ended up leaving that role entirely, and I was a freelancer again. And it was a really bad time because this is the Reddit chat wondering where I had disappeared to. And it was a really bad time for me to have that loss because I actually tore my ACL. I had to have surgery. I had to do 6 months of rehab to get back on my feet. And it was just a really difficult time in my life. And so it wasn't just the pint of ice cream. It was more like this, a lot of pints of ice cream, okay? I call this my ice cream era. And I think there's an adage that many of us know in our culture. It's actually Farsi, not Urdu, so I'm going to say it, and I'm probably not going to say it correctly. It's called In Niz Bogzarod, and it means this too shall pass. And you've probably heard this before. You hear it from uncles pouring you tea, maybe unsolicited advice when you're going through a tough time. But the actual origin of this story is really old. The great Persian poets of the 12th and 13th century talked about it. And it's very like Ek Purani Kahani, right? And the story, if you guys don't know it, is that a king asks wise men about an adage that will always hold true in joy and in sorrow, that the same thing might be true. And they pass to him a ring. And inscribed in the ring is this, that this too shall pass. And the ice cream era was not the end of my story. And for those of you who are coming here today with something to figure out, with a hope and a dream that you haven't figured out yet, it's definitely not the end of your story. The great moments of giving a TED Talk or doing a billboard, they're also not the end of the story. It is a continuous process. And that's the first thing I just want to remind you of, is that old lesson that you know already, that this too shall pass. I think that the circumstances that we have, they sometimes feel trapping, and you can scroll through a world where it seems like people have figured out, where it's been there. But in most of the time, you have no idea what lays ahead of you. And I think the 4-year-old version of me that was standing in a flat outside Gulshan Iqbal, which is a very middle-class neighborhood of Karachi, had no idea the things that my life would carry 30 years later, right? The great joys of having had a job at the New York Times, the great loss of losing my father. But it was all there in this small apartment building in Karachi that I would learn the way through it all. And it again is a second lesson that I think all of you are familiar with, because in this world of permanence, in this world where this too shall pass, if you're Pakistani, there's one thing that will always be true for you. And it's that auntie that's calling you, the family friend who needs a favor, the cousin's invitation to a birthday party that you don't really want to go to, you don't have time for, and your parents reminding you that you must go because you missed the last one. And that second lesson that I want to remind you of today is this idea that Dr. Qureshi talked about as well, this idea of community, that I think is a huge gift to all of us. I think it's hard coded into all of us from our ammis, our abbus, our khalas, our puppies. And sometimes this idea, it feels like the takalluf. It feels like it's a formality that you must do. It feels like an obligation. But it's really about the zeeb, about the culture that we learn, about how to show up for other people. And that's a lesson I learned from my father, Aftab Raza. As I told you, he passed away. But he was a man who never found an obligation that he didn't relish. If a cousin was getting married in Patna, my dad was like at the Indian consulate in the interrogation room, going and flying there to be there. A sick uncle in Chantilly, Virginia, he's calling, he's trying to find a doctor that could help him. A second cousin, once removed, living halfway across the world, my father would know the name of her son-in-law and her landline number. I wrote about Abu in the New York Times when he passed away, about how when I got into Stanford, he was thrilled. Not because it was a good school. I mean, part of it maybe was that. But really, he was thrilled because he had family nearby. And he thought, it's going to be great, Nami. It was my nickname, Nami. He said, it's going to be great, Nami. You're going to meet them. You're going to spend so much time with your cousin. You don't know him. And of course, I didn't do it. I was busy. I had my own chosen family. I was building out my American dream. And I didn't listen. Even when his emails came in all caps, you must go, I did not go. And it's not something I'm proud of, but I felt like I didn't have this time for like ordinary uncles and aunties who were going to tell me, kafi haldi lag rahi ho. And it was only in the last weeks of my life that I really understood what Abu had been telling me all the time. Because he was passing away and he didn't want to eat anymore. His life was very, very difficult. But when we told him that someone is coming tomorrow to say goodbye to you, Abu would scarf down a paratha because he wanted to stay alive so that other people could fulfill their obligation of saying goodbye to him. So he's willing to put himself through pain to allow others to have that obligation and to see the people in his life. And I know my father is not a unique story in this. This is a part of our culture. And it's a part of our culture that I hope very much that as young people in modernity, we never lose. When my father passed, so many people showed up. It was a pandemic. It was the middle of winter, but they showed up for the prayer, for the burial. They showed up for everything. All the people I hadn't shown up for. And that Urdu word, tazib, it doesn't quite translate. It means something like refinement or etiquette, I think, if you look it up. But it's really a grace in how you show up for other people, a warmth in how you receive them. And it's not performed. Sometimes there's the takalluf, but the best part is when there's the absence of all that. When you're just sitting around eating from Corningware, not showered, you ask for a second round of food because you're hungry, and you share the kufta with your cousin because you don't want to be that much of an a-hole, And it's many ways the opposite of a word that we talk about a lot in our current Western modern world, which is this word called boundaries. And you see it all over social media. You see it everywhere we are. You see it in our country and you see it in our politics. But, if anyone here has had to try to have a conversation with their own mother about boundaries, I'm very sorry. You probably didn't win. But in a modern culture where loneliness is a pandemic, where people bowl alone, where we're told to hold up those boundaries, I think there's such a beauty in this Pakistani culture that we were all raised in. And I think there's such a possibility in it as well. Because what I learned from my father is this idea that obligation, it doesn't just take from you. It really gives to you. It feeds you. It makes you full. And when I told you that story of going from my ice cream era to my Kardashian era, and okay, I'm not really in my Kardashian era yet, so I can't take credit for that, but it wasn't about the boundaries and this idea of focusing on myself and doing all this hard work that I did it. And it was a meritocracy. It was actually a real village of people who showed up for me. Some of them were Pakistani, some of them weren't. But it was, a friend who flew here from South Dakota, leaving her children to take care of me while I did my surgery for 3 days because I couldn't really move. It was my sister who shares every single episode immediately to her 300 friends followers on Instagram, and I'm surprised they haven't unfollowed her. It is the aunties in the WhatsApp chat who are just smashing the forward button, go on, queens. The limit on forward was invented for those aunties. And it's the friends who let me their apartment to film my podcast in, a lawyer who reviewed the contracts, a friend who's a publicist who pretended to be my publicist so that when I was on the red carpet, people would think I was actually worth speaking to and already famous. You know, it was all of these people, again, some of them Pakistani, some of them American, but all of them with this value of tehzeeb, this value that you know from your own families. And so I want to talk to you about this moment now and what this means, what the possibility of that tehzeeb is for all of us, because it's a unique moment, I think, for each of you to show up for yourself, for this community, for each other, and for people who are not actually in this community, people doing things that you believe in, whether or not they're Pakistani. When I was in my teens and 20s, I think there was a very different world. Like the aspiration was to be a doctor, a lawyer, maybe an economist, an entrepreneur. We didn't have many examples of Pakistanis in American culture that were shaping the culture, that were faces. And when we did, by the way, it felt a little bit like For Us, By Us, a Pakistani actor that we all knew, but maybe no one else did. They played Pakistani roles. And today we have tons. We have so many of them right here in New York City. Ali Sethi is making Urdu ghazals hot. Pasuri is creeping up on 1 billion views, if anyone knows Ali. Salman Tour, he paints our intimate images in his art and is shown in galleries all over the world. Rez Ahmed is dropping bait on Prime Video, and he might even bait MGM into making him the first Pakistani James Bond, inshallah. Shaina Zafar is a person who's young and crazy, and she's really galvanizing this Gen Z community at UTA, one of the premier talent agencies. Sana Amanat is making Marvel characters, some Pakistani Muslims, some others not. Journalists like Azmat Khan, Razina Ali, Maria Abadi, who you're going to meet later today, are telling other people's stories. And Nourain Khan is innovating at the Ford Foundation. Kashif Sheikh has created this community that brings so many of us together in our culture. We all met for Eid recently, and it's much bigger than Pakistanis or Muslims. It's for culture. It's for people who have a different lens on the culture, who have an opportunity to tell a story and be part of one. And there are others who don't share exact heritage, but they share our values, whether it's Ayman to Mehdi to Hassan's comedy special to Zoran Mamdani at Gracie Mansion being the first Muslim mayor of New York. I mean, all of this seemed absolutely impossible when I was a teenager, absolutely unconceivable to me. You know, when I went out to protest a bad war that was being fought on misinformation presented to the United Nations, my mother was afraid of me going there. She didn't want me to be seen. She didn't want me to be identified as different. She didn't want my voice out there. But that moment too has passed. And what I really love about this new moment, this moment, this moment for all of you young people, is that we're not just defined by our identities. We are supercharged, empowered by them, able to do everything we want in great spaces. Because I think some of you might have been invited to speak at a diversity panel, but maybe you're not invited to speak at the other panel. Some of you, you're an expert in the room, but people see you not for your expertise, but for how you look. And I know that really well because when I was a journalist and I started, when Gaza happened, when everything, happened afterwards, I found that people didn't see my foreign policy degrees. They didn't see that I went to Georgetown or Harvard, that I was a member at the Council on Foreign Relations. They saw what I looked like. And they thought they knew what I thought because of how I look like. Or they thought that that I thought what I thought because of how I look like. And I think it's so important, again, to be empowered by your identity, but not be confined entirely by it. To have a big voice, a big space. And when I started to make Smart Girl Dumb Questions, that was my idea, that I didn't want to just talk about my own experience as a Pakistani. I wanted to speak about everything. So that, why can't we have our own Oprahs, our own Adam Silvers, our own, this is the idea. So I just want to end that the answer to all of that isn't to stop talking. It's to get bigger, to make your dreams, your visions, your ambitions, your communities bigger. And this moment, this new moment, where we have so many champions and so many spaces in our culture, we really should celebrate. I want you to think of the impossible, what you think couldn't possibly be true in your teens, your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, wherever you are in this room. And imagine that in 20 years, it's going to be there. And what role are you going to play in making that happen? Because this too shall pass, all of it. And all you can do is build and build together. Thank you so much.